Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our workshop today. Today is August 13, Wednesday. Today's topic is food labeling and meal planning, hosted by Momiji, Japanese Social Services, and Yihong Center. I will quickly share the housekeeping rules. So this section is recorded. Please refrain from recording, taking photo of this section. You will receive a copy of the presentation slides after the section. You will mute during the presentation. The questions via chat will be taken at the Q&A time. Also, we would love to invite you to turn on your camera if you're comfortable. So seeing each other faces help make the workshop more engaging and interactive, but this is totally optional. Hosting organizations. We have Momiji Healthcare Society. Chikake, she is absent today because of sickness. So we have Rumiko. She is from Japanese Social Services. She is the volunteer and program coordinator. And myself, my name is Fiona. I'm the program worker at Yihong Center. So we are happy to have Eleni Papadakis as our speaker today. She is a registered dietitian and also a diabetics educator. She is from LMC Healthcare.
Thank you for the introduction. My name is Eleni. I'm a registered dietitian, and I'm looking forward to talking with you today a little bit more about how to understand your food a little bit better. So, talking a little bit about nutrition labels and food labeling, portion sizes, how to cook, some strategies for a little bit more smart cooking, a little bit about meal prepping as well. So, we'll touch on a little bit of everything. So I think you can hear me all right, but if you can't, please let me know. And then I think we mentioned for questions, if you have any throughout the workshop, please write them in the chat and we can have a question and answer period at the end. Or at the end, you can unmute yourself as well and ask any questions you have. So today we're going to talk about why healthy eating matters, especially as we get a little bit older, how food affects our health, and if you have diabetes, how it affects your blood sugars as well, how to read food labels, some strategies for meal planning and grocery shopping, how to make a nice balanced meal, and some tips for healthy cooking. So why do we care about healthy eating, or why does it matter? So many, older adults are living with diabetes or pre-diabetes. Maybe you do have diabetes. And healthy eating in general can really help reduce diabetes complications, especially when we manage our blood sugar levels really well, and can help us boost our energy as well throughout the day and just improve our quality of life in general. So if you are trying to pay attention to your blood sugars, you may already know how the food impacts your blood sugars, but the main thing is our carbohydrates. So this is things like rice, bread, fruit, anything that turns into sugar in our bodies. The carbohydrate is the main food that increases our blood sugar levels. And when we are eating, we want to be choosing our carbohydrates that are higher in fiber. So, for example, whole grain bread over like a white bread or white rice. And as well, our more sugary drinks, things like juice and pop, will spike our blood sugars quite a bit. Things like sweets and desserts as well will do the same thing. So these are definitely foods that we want to pay attention to and maybe limit a little bit in our diet. And as well, overall, like I mentioned, adding fiber and protein too help to slow down sugar absorption and helps to keep more stable blood sugar levels. So as well, just in addition, supporting stable blood sugars, like I mentioned, you want to pair anytime you're eating carbohydrates with some sort of protein. And we'll talk a little bit more about what protein are recommended. So things like meats, fish, tofu are really good, and adding fiber as well. And this will help prevent our blood sugars from rising too much. And as well, we want to have regular meal times. So trying to not go too long without eating, that can cause your blood sugars to fluctuate a little bit more. Choosing more low glycemic index foods, which we'll talk about what that means, but generally foods that are higher in fiber. And then make sure you keep hydrated and choosing water as much as possible instead of things like juice or pop. So, in terms of portion sizes, as we get older, it's likely that our appetites start to fluctuate. Our appetite may decrease a little bit, so you may not feel as hungry. So, overall, we need fewer calories, likely also because we're not as active anymore as we used to be. So, you'll need fewer calories, but maybe more nutrients. So, more like I mentioned, protein and fiber to keep our energy levels stable throughout the day. So if you want to estimate your portion sizes, you can use your hand. So if you're looking at a portion of meat for protein or for fish, you want to look at maybe the size of the palm of your hand. For your carbohydrates, things like rice or potatoes, you can use your fist. So you can have about the size of your fist at your meals. And then 2 fingers for your fat. So this can be things like oil, avocado, any foods that are a little bit higher in fat. And a tip, if your appetite isn't as good as it used to be, maybe try smaller, more frequent meals throughout the day. So, like smaller snacks instead of 3 big meals if you don't have as much of an appetite for a bigger portion of food. So this is just an example, like I mentioned. So a fist for carbohydrates, your palm for your protein, and then for vegetables as well. At our meals, we want lots of vegetables. So you can do 2 handfuls, 2 whole handfuls of vegetables. So now we'll talk about reading food labels and how to read the label.
で、今から食品ラベルの読み方についてお話しします。
So, a food label, you have probably seen it before on maybe like a package of crackers or chips or something like that. It's usually required on most of our packaged foods. So, you won't find it on our fresh foods like fruits and vegetables, things like meat, but you'll find it on things like, bags of or loaves of bread, for example. And our food label will show what's inside the food in one portion of whatever the food is. So it will show the calories in that serving, all of the nutrients, the vitamins and minerals, and the ingredients as well. So some things to look for on the label, the serving size. So is it for the entire package or is it just one portion? If it's a box of crackers, for example, is it for 10 crackers or is it for the whole box? For calories, you want to focus less on the number for the calories and more about, some of the other nutrients like our fiber and our protein, like I mentioned. And so some other things to look for. So sugar, you want to check the ingredients to see if it's added sugar or natural sugar. For carbohydrates, you want to be looking at the total carbohydrates and the amount of fiber as well. And then for sodium, if the product is very high in sodium, we want to avoid foods that have a lot of salt because too much salt can raise our blood pressure. So definitely paying attention to that as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about the serving size, and then on the next slide, I'll show you an example. So if you look at the serving size, it's always at the very top of the label, and it might say per 100 grams or per serving, whatever that serving is, or it may say it's for the whole package. So, for example, if you're looking at a box of crackers, the serving size might be 10 crackers, and calories for those 10 crackers might be 150 calories. If the bag has 30 crackers and you eat the whole bag, then you would multiply that 150 by 3 because you're tripling the serving size. So instead of the 10 crackers, you're having 30. So you'd be having, for example, a total of 450 calories. So if you're eating more than the serving size on the label says, then you would want to multiply the rest of the numbers as well. So this is what a nutrition label looks like. So as I mentioned, the serving size will always be at the very top. So this specific one, the serving size is 2/3 of a cup. I'm not 100% sure what this food product is, but this is just an example. So we'll show the serving size. Under the serving size, you'll see the calories as well. And then it will have every other nutrient too. So fat, total carbohydrates, fiber, protein, and we'll talk a little bit more about what to look out for. And just one more thing I wanted to note, it's important to know that just because the box or the container has one serving, it doesn't mean that this is the only amount that you're allowed to have. So the nutrition label is based on this serving, but it's okay if you eat a little bit more or a little bit less than what the serving size is. So as I mentioned, the one thing you want to focus on is fiber. So again, fiber helps to slow down the digestion of carbohydrates and will help your blood sugars not to spike as high. It also helps you keep nice and full until your next meal so that you're not very, very hungry by the next time you eat. It can lower your cholesterol levels. So when you're looking at the label, you want to choose a food with at least 3 grams of fiber in each serving. As well, you want to pay attention to the ingredients list. So the ingredients list can be a little bit confusing, but you want to look out for specific words. So if you're trying to pay attention to maybe some added sugars, look for words like glucose, fructose, any syrup or maltose. This will mean that sugar has been added into this food. And you want to choose foods with less than 10 grams of sugar per serving. And like I mentioned too, we want to pay attention to the salt or the sodium from the label. So some of our more processed foods like pickles or instant ramen, miso soup, chips, cookies, they'll often be a little bit higher in sodium because the processing helps for them to stay good for a long time. That's why they can keep them on the shelves. So everyone should aim for less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. And a lot of our sodium will come from things like sauces, like soy sauce, for example, will have a lot of salt. So if you're trying to pay attention to your salt intake, choosing a low sodium version of whatever you're getting. So you can get a low sodium soy sauce, or you can dilute it a bit, even adding a little bit of water to take away some of the salt. And you want to pay attention to the fat as well. So a lot of, again, our processed foods like our cookies and chips will be a little bit high in saturated and trans fats. So you want to limit these as much as possible, choosing more of our healthy fats from our whole foods like nuts, avocados, things like olive oil. And limiting saturated and trans fats will help to keep your heart nice and healthy in the long term. And some words to look for on the labels. So if you see low fat, maybe look at the sugar content. If something has a little bit less fat, it may have added sugar to make up for some of the loss of flavor. If something says there's no sugar added, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's sugar-free. It just might be a little bit lower in sugar, but will still likely have sugar. And if it says light, like if you're looking at a mayonnaise or a yogurt, for example, often will be lower in calories or lower in fat, but still a good idea to check the label. And as well, if you're looking at condiments or any sauces, read the front of the label too. So like I mentioned, for soy sauce, there are lots of low sodium options available. things like miso, check the salt content, and salad dressings too. It might have some added salt, added sugar. So look for the ones that say, low in fat or the light versions or lower in sodium as well. So now we'll talk a little bit about meal planning. So if you're cooking just for yourself or maybe for two people or even more, some of the common problems that people find is that it's hard to not make too much food if you're, only a couple people at home. Or maybe you lack some motivation or you don't, you're not able to move around too well or you don't have too much energy. It can make it hard to prepare your meals as well. And then eating the same thing every day can get a little bit boring, so it's hard to, think of new ideas every day. So we'll talk a little bit about how to kind of get over these barriers. So some solutions can be to plan ahead, to freeze some of your food or some of your portions, to switch up your recipes, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that as well. So, how to start planning if you do the grocery shopping or you do the cooking at your house. Choosing simple meals for maybe the next week, so over 3 or 4 days. Make sure you make a shopping list before you go shopping so that you can stick to your list and that you don't, get distracted by some of the other foods that are in the grocery store. So when you're making your list for maybe the week or the next couple weeks, you want to include at least one source of protein. You can do fish, tofu, chicken. If you're planning for a longer period of time, you can maybe double this list. Choosing 2 vegetables. This can be any vegetable. Green ones are great. Things like broccoli, Brussels sprouts. Choosing one starch, so this can be sweet potatoes, regular potatoes, rice, and healthy fats you want to include as well, things like avocados or nuts. So some tips for when you're going grocery shopping, trying to buy only what you need for 3 to 5 days. And depending on how often you're grocery shopping as well, maybe you want to double this and buy a little bit more if you're shopping for the next couple weeks or longer than that. But trying to stick to your list and buying only what you need. And a really good option are frozen fruits and veggies as well. They'll have the same nutrition as the fresh ones, usually a little bit cheaper, and they'll last a long time in the freezer. And then trying to avoid buying our more processed foods or sweets, or more processed snacks, because those will, like we talked about, will have a little bit more sugar and more sodium. And as well, some tips for reducing food waste. So if you're finding that you made too much food, try to plan out your meals using the same ingredients for multiple different recipes. So buying veggies that you can use a few different times, things like carrots for soup or for stir fry, and proteins as well. So you can buy maybe like a larger pack of meat and use it for a couple different recipes. You can freeze your extra food as well, so you can keep it in smaller containers and take it out when you want to eat it. And as well, using leftovers from maybe the night before from dinner, you can add them to soups or to rice dishes or stir fry, anything where you can just throw in a lot of vegetables and proteins and it will still taste good. And just some extra tips. So buying lettuce or things like kale that are pre-washed to save you some time as well. You can use a rice cooker for making things like stews or mixing rice with even with different meats or fish like salmon. Using a big baking sheet and doing more one-pan meals, things like chicken with some vegetables, sticking it all in the oven, and that will save lots of time and you won't be using a lot of dishes for your cooking either. So we'll save some cleanup time. And if you're eating by yourself, trying to eat as mindfully as you can. So, turning off the TV, having no distractions when you're eating. Try to eat at the table instead of like on the couch. And making sure you're taking your time and enjoying your food. This will help you digest your food a little bit better, and you'll pay attention to how much you're eating, and you'll pay attention to when you're full. So we'll talk now about how to make your plate or your meal nice and balanced. And like we mentioned earlier, having a little bit of carbohydrates, protein, fiber, and everything that's important to have at our meals. So for our balanced plate, like we mentioned, depending on your appetite or how much you feel like eating, you can either do, 3 meals a day, like your usual breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or you can do smaller meals or snacks throughout the day, maybe 5 to 6 smaller balanced snacks if you don't have as much of an appetite for maybe a bigger portion of food. So like I mentioned, our plate, we want to include carbohydrates, protein, and vegetables. And the protein and the vegetables will help to slow down the digestion of our carbohydrates. And again, if you're paying attention to your blood sugars, it will help to slow down the rise in your blood sugars. So we want half of our plate to be made up of our vegetables, a quarter of our carbohydrates, and a quarter proteins. And if you want to help your blood sugars even more, you can eat your meat or your protein first, your vegetables first, and then save your carbohydrates until the end. And that will be even better for your blood sugars. And like I mentioned, make sure you're including protein every time you eat, and will help keep your blood sugars nice and steady, keep you nice and full, and will help with growing your muscles too, and preventing muscle loss. So it will help keep you nice and strong. So some sources of protein are listed here. So things like nuts, peanut or almond butter, seeds, meat, eggs, fish, yogurt, hummus, all of our beans, tofu. So there are a lot of different foods that have protein, and you can add any of these to your meal as your protein source. And vegetables are really important because they're full of fiber. So we mentioned it stabilizes your blood sugars and helps keep you nice and full too. So you'll feel full until your next meal. And some ways you can use your vegetables, like stir frying them or steaming them. And again, you can use frozen vegetables. They'll be just as good as fresh. Prepackaged salads are really easy. Roasting a large, baking sheet of vegetables to have for the whole week. Using spring mix for a base for your salad. And fill your plate with vegetables first so that a lot of your plate is full of the vegetables, and then you can add your protein and your carbohydrates after. So I'll talk a little bit about the glycemic index. Maybe you've heard about it, maybe not, but it's talking about different carbohydrate foods. So it's talking about how different carbohydrates will affect your blood sugars. So our low glycemic index foods will be higher in fiber, and it will raise our blood sugars more slowly. And our high glycemic index foods will be a little bit more processed, higher in sugar, and will raise our blood sugars more quickly. So this is an example of some glycemic index carbohydrates. So you can see it goes low, medium, high. And the first line you can see is more breads. So like whole grain bread, for example, will be the best. It will have the most fiber. On the other side, the more high GI will be like white bread. So white bread will raise your blood sugars more quickly. And you can see some other foods as well. So rice and potatoes will be on here too. So more low GI will be like a parboiled rice. Medium will be a brown or basmati rice. and more high will be a short grain or white rice. And there are ways to, still have rice and other things, but maybe adding a little bit of extra fiber, which we'll talk about too. But for example, if you want to have white rice, adding a little bit of quinoa to boost the fiber and add some more protein too will be better for your blood sugars. And we'll talk about some cooking tips now and how to cook a little bit healthier. So some better methods for cooking, really good ones are like steaming, boiling, grilling, baking. You want to avoid deep frying or cooking that maybe uses a lot of oil. And you can use things like non-stick pans if you want to try to use a little bit less oil, or parchment paper if, again, you want to try to use less oil in your cooking. And some things that might help with this too. So using an air fryer, if you want to fry anything, you'll need very little oil for it. An Instant Pot, rice cooker, slow cooker will all be really good and helpful. If you have any of these, you don't have to go out and buy them, but if you have them, they'll be helpful for your cooking. So choosing the right carbohydrates, we want to choose, like I mentioned, our more low glycemic index carbohydrates. And you'll have some of these in a handout as well, so you can see maybe a bigger list of all the different foods. But for example, trying things like barley or a mixed grain rice, or like I mentioned, quinoa, will give you a little bit more fiber, more protein, and less simple carbohydrates. So you'll see less of a spike in your blood sugars when you're eating these foods. And again, like I mentioned a million times, trying to pair your vegetables with your protein. That will be even better for your blood sugars. So when you're choosing or you're trying to choose the right protein, good choices are things like grilled fish, or really any fish is really good. Mackerel, salmon, cod, tofu, and eggs are really good sources of protein as well. And any of our plant-based proteins like our beans and lentils, and our lean meats as well. So chicken breast, or turkey. And the ones you want to limit are more of our red meats, just in terms of our the fat content as well, and our processed meats. So things like ham and sausage. And doesn't mean that you can't eat these things, but we want to choose them less often. And when we're trying to choose the right fats, good ones can be things like sesame oil, olive oil, avocados, nuts. Avoid things like margarine that's a little bit more processed, or like vegetable shortening, for example. And some ways to add some extra nutrients or some more vegetables. If you don't like vegetables too much, you can always hide them in your food. So obviously, if you're cooking, you will know that they're in there, but they'll be easier to mix into things like sauces or soups, stews, if you want to add some beans, and to your baking too. So if you do some baking, you can use things like zucchini, making like zucchini muffins or loaves if you want to try that. Some people like it, some people don't. But it's just ways to add some extra vegetables into your foods. And some ways to reduce our salt when we're cooking or in our recipes. Trying to choose our more fresh foods like fruits and vegetables that don't have any salt added. Again, read the food labels, and if you're looking at maybe two different ones, choose the one that has less salt. And you can use different things to add flavor if you want to use less salt when you're cooking. Things like herbs, spices, lemon or lime to add some flavor. And if you're buying canned beans or vegetables, try to rinse them off with water before you use them to get rid of some of the salt that they sit in the can. And try to make your own sauces too. So if you're making like a stir fry or a salad, try to make your own sauce or your own salad dressing instead of buying one from the store. And with sugar too, if you're baking or even cooking, using fruit instead of, sugar for adding some sweetness to your baking, things like apples or berries if you're making muffins, for example. Using other things to add some flavor, so you can use a little bit less sugar, things like vanilla or spices like cinnamon. And then for sauces as well, this can have things like honey or brown sugar, like sauces or salad dressings too. So trying to avoid the ones that are a little bit higher in sugar. And then these are just some ideas of things you can have for breakfast, lunch, dinner. You don't have to follow these exactly, but just some ideas for putting our balanced plate into practice. So an example of a breakfast you can have, if you like oatmeal, like half a cup of oatmeal with milk, or you can do water as well. Milk will be a little bit better because it will have some extra protein too. You can do some chia seeds in there for some extra fiber. Berries as well will have lots of fiber. And then for some protein, you can do different things on the side. So if you have maybe a bigger appetite, even one boiled egg on the side or some Greek yogurt. And then again, for some flavor, instead of adding, lots of sugar to add the flavor, you can do cinnamon and vanilla or even some artificial sweetener if you have. And another idea, something a little more simple, maybe if you're not as hungry one day, even just a slice of toast, like a whole grain toast with, to get some veggies in, adding in some veggies with your eggs if you like eggs, or you can do tofu instead of eggs. You can have that on the side of the toast or on top of the toast. And then just for some extra fiber and for a little bit of energy and carbohydrates, you can do a fruit on the side. So like an orange or a small apple or some berries. And just an idea for lunch. So if you like tuna salad, or you can do egg salad, again, on a slice of toast, or you can do a sandwich. And add some veggies too. So you can do toppings like cucumber, onions, tomatoes, and then again, a fruit on the side. So apples or berries or a pear, whatever fruit you like. And another example, if you're maybe a little less hungry, some soup. So if you want to make like a chicken or tofu soup with some veggies, for some extra veggies, you can do a salad on the side, but you don't need to if you have some in your soup, and maybe a slice of toast on the side for a source of carbohydrates. And then just some ideas for dinner. So you can do like a sweet potato, any source of protein you like. So you can do chicken or fish, tofu again, 3 to 4 ounces. That will be, like we mentioned, about the size of our palm. And then some veggies, any veggies you like. So you can steam them or you can do a salad on the side. So you can see you have a little bit of veggies, some carbohydrates from your potato, and then protein from your meat or your fish. And then our last idea for dinner, maybe if you're feeling a little bit more hungry, you can do a stir fry with like rice or quinoa, or mix them together like I talked about. And then again, choosing a source of protein, you can do chicken, beef, pork, tofu, even some eggs. And then any vegetables you like, broccoli, cabbage, peppers, green beans. And then maybe you want to make your own sauce for some flavor using like a lower sodium soy sauce with some garlic, ginger, sesame seeds, and anything else that you want to add. So that was the end of all the content from today's workshop. I have some discussion questions if you want to share your thoughts. And I did see a couple questions come in the chat, so feel free to share if you learned anything new today, or if there's, something that I talked about that you're looking forward to trying. But if not, we can definitely answer any questions that people have.